Hello, and thank you for clicking on my video. We're going to get into open paths and definitive ends. I don't know if there's actually a proper term for them, but this is me making up my theory and how I work. So we're going to take a quick look at this. This is a bad map. There's nothing really going on here, um, but I've been doing some mapping, working to get some things to come together better. Like this bit here is good. Brings the player down to an area that I want them to go to, but we're not going to be looking at. What I want to take a look at is the map above this. And here we have, first of all, I'm going to start with paths. Most paths in your game are going to be open paths, and those are paths that essentially just guide the player along. Here, our road is an open path that continuously guides us, and it eventually leads us to a village end up here. Now, open paths will eventually come to what I call a definitive end. In this case, this village is a definitive end, but our open path continues through it. So most of your roads in your game are going to be open paths. A definitive end is a place where a path ends, but it should end in a meaningful way. That's the main point of definitive ends. So here we have a little bit that guides the player to the right. And while I'm on this, let's talk about your junk. Not that junk, but junk on your maps. Like this tree stump here, this is in the player's way. It's like cleaning up your room. If you don't have like grime and stuff in your room and you're just picking stuff up, you get stuff out of your walk paths. Clear it out of the way. The stump is clearly in the way of the player's walk path, so we should remove it. We can do a quick save, and whenever we don't make changes on the database or plugins, we're fine. Just refresh the screen. And now we've got that stump out of our player's walk path there. And we've got this open path that loops around up to the town here. Now this open path is kind of neat because if we come down this way, we may not explore this open path over here. But if we come from this way, then we do explore this open path. And when this open path comes out up here, lets us know, hey, there's a little secret area here. Now this down here is going to be what I'm talking about with definitive ends. We come down into this little small area, and I used to have a rock right here, but I removed it because this is already a tight area, so it's just junk getting in the player's way. But here, we have a definitive end, but no reward for the player. The main thing that you have to keep in mind is your player wants to explore your maps, and you want the player to explore your map. The more they explore your maps, the more they're playing your game, but you have to keep it fun for them. If they come to these definitive ends and there's no reward, then they're not going to enjoy exploring your map. When you reward your player for exploring your map, they spend more time trying to explore your map. So wherever you have a definitive end, there should be a reward. It doesn't have to be treasure. It can be. In this case, the road comes to, even though the road continues through, it's both still a road and a definitive end because this town kind of serves as a definitive end. But if we want something more concrete as an example, we can look at this spot over here. We've got an open path, but it also leads us up this way to a definitive end. And here we have a bit of soft ground the player can dig up and get a treasure. So make good use of your definitive ends. And you can also make really good use of your open paths. Like this is a really excellent example of an open path because it leads the player to an area they might not have otherwise found. And it's good to keep exploring your own map always run around, explore, and play test. I'm going to talk real quick about another concept, and that's called implied line. You see how we have the grass running along the fence line, the bushes there? They sort of follow these fence lines. Those are implied lines that kind of let the player go, okay, this continues here. You can break up your fence line, but keeping kind of an implied path along the line kind of keeps that idea of where the paths clearly are. And here we've broken it up completely. Now the player is inclined to wander through here. We've broken up our fence line. We've got an open break in any implied lines. This sort of keeps that fence line area closed in, but it still invites the player to come over here for. And you see, this is another map where I'm still working on. And here we have a definitive end that rewards the player for seeing this path through the. And you'll notice too that on these maps that I haven't gone through and redone, there's a lot of open area with just trees scattered about. And I'm going to resize some of these so that they'll look better. But we've got nothing going on here. My original idea was to create open world maps. And while that's fine, it doesn't translate well to RPG Maker games because unlike Skyrim, where you're in a first person view and you can see a clear visual of lots of animation, lots of colors and light gradients, you can create open sweeping vistas of terrain. But in RPG Maker, you don't really have that luxury. So it's better to make your maps a bit more compact and kind of keep things visually interesting by giving the player lots of places to explore and having a lot of stuff going on, but not too much stuff going on. This area right here is kind of pushing the limit of where you've got too much stuff going on. We've got the player wanting to go here, we've got this break over here, we've got a bunch of different little terrain factors. We have a hidden open path over here, but you can compensate these tight areas with open areas, which is going to bring me to another point. This nice open area over here is a nice relief from this compact area over here, but notice this is a definitive end. So we have this path that leads up to an open area. But this isn't a path, despite that there's plenty of paths for the player to go from this spot. This is still a definitive end because the player comes over here and stops at this camp. And there's nothing else guiding the player through here. This campsite is your definitive end, even though it's completely open on almost all sides. Now back to the cleaning up your clutter. Notice these little areas here, even though I've got trees and stuff just kind of sitting around here, they're fine because they're not really in the player's walk path. If I want the player to come through here and I put a bush or something in this little area, then that would not be good because then the player trying to walk through here gets stuck on a bush, has to go around it. It doesn't seem like much, but it is a minor annoyance for the player. And the last thing you want to do is annoy your players. They should be having fun playing the game, not running into blocks and having to circumvent them. This here is another implied path, and it's an open path that goes out to this side, and they hit this area. Now notice that the way I have this open area angled, it encourages the player to move downward at an angle, and they come to this spot. And now they're at a definitive end. Even though it's open over here, the path has ended essentially right here. It's sort of an implied path. Now, you don't have to create an item or a site or scenery every time. Your definitive end could be, let's say we put a treasure over here on this hilltop, and this is where the player can get a good view of it. Legend of Zelda does this a lot, where you'll be able to go to a spot. It is a definitive end, but you can see a treasure or something, and then you have to wonder, oh, I couldn't see that from anywhere else. How do I get there? So you can use your definitive ends creatively to create things other than just treasure and sights for the player to see. Here we have coming from this way, you aren't really inclined to, well, I guess you are kind of inclined to come this way. There's a break here. You kind of come around this way, and we have an open path. But you're also kind of inclined to come down here, which would create a definitive end. From this side, though, we're mainly following the road. You see how I just naturally kind of wander down here? It's because we're following what we also call natural lines of drift, or rather what I'm going to call natural lines of drift. Places the player are naturally inclined to go. And we've created a definitive end here. Even though it's not ending the player's movement anywhere, it's a spot where visually the player has come to an end, and somewhat physically because they can't move south or west from. But there's a definitive end here. There should be something here for the player to investigate more. If we go further down the road, we can see that now we've got this area up here. So what's interesting about this is the player is inclined to actually explore this area over here. Even though there's no reward really for going this way, they might find this little secret spot here to go up this way, but there's no real reward for going this way. But it's not a definitive end. It's just an open path that comes back to other paths. Now, very important is when you have definitive ends like this one, where the player has to go out of their way to discover them, you absolutely need to in this case, I put a little spot that the player can dig up. I'm breaking shovels left and right, and I'm out of shovels. But the point is, there's a reward here. Once again, it doesn't necessarily have to be treasure, but I'm more inclined to add treasure in spots where the player has to like really consciously try to get to. And like the other spot we looked at with the hill, that's really easy to get to. We could do a visual there, but this takes a little bit of effort to want to go around here and look around. So I'm more inclined to put treasure in those spots. And this open path up here actually comes out to a definitive end where the player has a little fishing spot that they fish at. So if we go back, go around, we've got another little interesting area up here. Once again, when the player is exploring, they see these dirt paths, they see the break in the field, and they're inclined to wander over here. Now, the scenery here alone is something of a definitive end, but you wouldn't want to just say, hey, look at this, because this isn't an amazing vista or anything. So there should be something here for the player to at least interact with. Maybe like a little guy that they can talk to. But more than that, there's also another open path over here that's kind of hidden. And we use the lack of grass and terrain, just these green swaths, to separate out our areas. Notice how most of the tree line is in the thick grass, but most of the walk paths are clear. This one's actually fine to have that clutter here because this is a bit of a secret path, but it kind of guides the player up to this spot where they find these ruins, and they can find this little treasure chest up here with a little bit of lore in it. And they're also inclined to go up here. Now there's nothing up here yet. We might put something there, but we keep guiding the player back around. This definitive end here, there should be a reward. Now what's nice about using the lack of grass here is even though I came from over here, where there's a grassy area, if I go over here, I know because of the empty patch of grass being connected to this map down here, that this is where I need to go back to the south if I don't want to get caught up on these trees. So you can also use your lack of grass to create open paths for the player to follow. I learned a technique from a fellow in our Discord that that I frequent about keeping fence lines and hills and using them on the sides of the roads, especially with trees along fence lines. That helps create these guided open paths. So I'm using a lot of terms right now, guided open paths, hidden paths, and all that stuff. And that's just stuff I'm saying on the fly, but I think I'm going to stick with them. Guided paths being paths that you're using terrain and other blocking features to guide the player along, or even visual features. or even implied lines. Now, implied lines is something I picked up from art class. Here we have an implied line of grass following the fence. And it's nice to keep implied lines following hard line. Fence would be like a hard line, terrain the player can't move through. And implied lines mean terrain the player can move through, but stays along a path. Well, that's the main thing I want to show you, is mainly the concept of open paths player can move through, but more importantly, making sure your definitive ends have a reward, like this right here, a definitive end that leads to a little spot where the player can find treasure. Well, I guess that's it. So I appreciate you watching my video, and thank you for your time, and have a great day.